I'm Justine Rosenthal, editor of The National Interest, and we are here today with Igor Yurgens, who is the executive chairman of the Institute of Contemporary Development, which, to put in some context, has as the chairman of its board of trustees Dmitry Medvedev, and so therefore has some influence, let us just say, in Russian politics. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you.
And you recently came out with a report, your institute came out with a report, a sort of Russia 2030, which caused some controversy, from what I understand.
Mm-hmm.
If you could just start by outlining what the major recommendations of that white paper were.
Well, it's a comprehensive picture, I would say, of how Russia should be by the 2030 from the point of view of freedom-loving, peace-loving, liberal people who wanted to be, Russia to be part of the global world with all its authenticity and identity, but as part of that family. And basic truths, so to say, are very simple. Multi-party democracy, the division between executive, legislative, judicial, and information powers, strong civil society, participation of Russia in all rules-setting international organizations where we do not participate yet, like WTO, OECD, and very serious steps towards unification with the European Union on one hand and with the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, bearing in mind that both of them will change because in its present shape they are not ready to accommodate Russia.
So did all parts of this report, all the things you outlined, cause controversy? Were there some parts in particular that you think are not already sort of pro forma accepted, but were more accepted than other parts?
I would say that for the majority of intellectuals, or I would say proto-elitist forces in Russia, most of what I said, with the exception of surprisingly enough, or not surprisingly enough, NATO membership was acceptable.
Now, why was it the NATO part that you think got everybody's hackles up?
Some professional people, including professionals in the military community, would say this is a good idea, but it's very hard to contemplate at the moment because NATO was so aggressive towards Russia. When you start analyzing what they call by aggression, you realize that sometimes it's a lot of mistrust and misunderstanding, but not real deeds, which really threaten the national interest of Russian Federation. One other aspect is that they sort of, because of our geopolitical past, they sort of tried to ignore the very serious and, from my point of view, number one question, was the extension of NATO, enlargement at the expense of our former Warsaw Treaty allies. Was it imposed on those nations or did they vote for it? The question is, did Poles or Romanians or Bulgarians ask for the American bases, reinforcements, participation in NATO, or was it imposed on them, what they conquered? And when you realize absolutely clearly that those nations selected NATO as their preferred course, then it's totally different discussion.
Now, do you want to see Russia in NATO as a way to, does that say you want to see Russia move westward? Is it a more Machiavellian, if we're involved in NATO, NATO becomes a different beast, less powerful, less threatening to Russia? What are why do you push that prescription?
I think I would buy both of your
Okay.
options.
Maybe there's a third option.
Yeah, probably there are more to this even than those two. But first of all, NATO would be much more safe if Russia is on board. Russia would spend much less and more efficiently on its own defense if we're members of the bloc. The bloc, of course, should become a sort of a transatlantic security organization which takes care of our common worries. And I think that the world, the way it develops at the moment, presents us a lot of common threats to our civilization, to which we belong, I think. Judeo-Christian one, though we have a lot of Muslim people, but they accepted this civilization as their own. So I would say that we have to make a thorough analysis of all pluses and minuses of being together. It should be academic research first, suggested and proposed for consideration to the executive and legislative branches, both in Russia and in Brussels. And then probably we will come to a much more rational solution. I'm sure that the combination and the fusion of the potentials of Russia and EU and Russia and NATO, both in economic and in the military spheres, would consolidate European civilization and will return it back to the first rank of players. And if we stay divided, then Asian and American civilization probably will be developing faster than we.
Well, let me ask you, do you see this, I mean, as an American, I wonder, is this a way for America to balance China? I mean, is it that Russia is in the balance now?
Triangle is always better than two-sided balance. It's a more steady geometrical figure. China and the United States at a given moment created an impression in the world that it will be a G2. Then when we started examining all the components of this G2, we found out that there are more controversies than commonalities. And China, throughout its 5,000 years civilizational history, had enough of ups and downs, and some of its ups and some of the downs shows us how dangerous that could be to the both neighboring nations and to the world in general. So from this point of view, all the problems of China are ahead of them and not behind them. They learned a lot. It's a huge and very interesting and powerful nation, but like any adolescent at this point of time, it will have its own complexes and assertiveness and arrogance and all of that. And we have to live through that. And we, being an immediate neighbor, will have all the pluses and minuses of such development. So from our point of view, equally good relations with China and the United States is very important for Russian Federation. But again, if we take Europe into equation, then much stable tripod than two legs of this equation.
So you would see it America, a new Europe that was what we now think of as EU with Russia included, and then China as the third pole.
But I would add the component of transatlantic security understanding, because my political history and political economy shows that our instinctive and rational reaction to many things in the security field, in economic field, are pretty much aligned. I mean, the European and American ones. Through Anglo-Saxon culture, Americans are part of that.
Thank you so much for taking the time to do this with us.
Thank you.